Okay. Hello, anybody who's here. Let me get my chat window up and going. Welcome to Airwindows Q&A session. And let's see. If I sound a little raggy, well, that's just been going through it the last week or so. Hopefully I will stay well. And here are some folks. Where are they? Here they are. Ta-da. Boy, I have been getting stuff together with some of these things, and I am simply not used to the new screen recording setup nearly as much as I was. I like having you guys in a little window, but let's make that be smaller, shall we? There we go. Okay, I think we are about ready to roll. So, ta-da! I got my chat, I got OBS going. I am probably in focus. I need to work on the lookup tables that I use for the visuals. I have an idea of a way that I could make that better by doing the same film-style desaturation, but selecting only areas of bright colors. And essentially what I need to do is do the lookup table thing with OBS and other stuff like that, but apply saturation curves to it much like I do with audio plugins. So yeah. And we got a chat, and I am ready to answer your questions about things, and we're going to go for an hour and 45 minutes. Actually, it should be a little bit less than that, but I'm not concerned. I'll go for an hour and 45 minutes. It should be a little less than that because I'm making less money, but enough to get my cool new microphone, so it's all good. And you were not wrong. The image is a bit grayer today. I could fool with it. Like if I meant to do the thing where I was making it less vivid, then I can do that. Ah, somebody recognized it. Darwindies. You are correct, and I am very pleased. That beats the weird microphone that I made out of a Studio Project C1. It is a solid month's worth of income, but the great thing about that is that if I can pull it off, and I managed to pull it off, I can measure it. I can measure it, and I can do a plugin based on it, and that's going to be exciting. Not promising anything right away. There might be a bit of work involved, but I think it would be worth doing. And like I joked around in the video, here, tell you what, let me move things around. Also, like, check it out. There's a light. And I'm trying to figure out where I even sit in the screen. Here's good. So yeah, these are interesting things. One of the things that frustrates me is that I work on all of this stuff, but I tend to want it all to happen and come to fruition and give me results like immediately. And it never works that way, and especially when I have a lot of stuff. Like I have a list of things that I'm working on, and I've got some of the things crossed off here, but oh my God, there's so much going on. And fairly often I have to have patience. So doing all of the plugins, which is what I was doing that kept me up really late last night, is doing all the plugins for the dither stuff buys me a little time, because once I've got those ready to go, that means that I can put them out, but during the week I can work on stuff that doesn't necessarily have to be ready right away. And I'll tell you, Elias, what I'm going to do to try out the new microphone and get it working properly. And it is well worth doing, too. What I'm going to do is set up my mic pre's and such, and also get my little lavalier mic. I have a perfectly good little lavalier mic. It's not a studio condenser, so there's always going to be limitations there. But one of the things about a lavalier mic is, since it's this tiny little microphone capsule, it's more similar to measurement microphones than it is to something that's like flashier, which is very much what the Colaris is. It's very much flashier. I was joking around about how it is as near as I'm going to get to an Elam 251. I'm never going to see an Elam 251 because nothing that I do is ever going to get me into the zone where I can blow a month's worth of pay on something like that. Because the Elam 251 is a vintage microphone that might cost you $100,000. And that's just like, nope, not going to even think about that. But happily, Roswell made a Elam 251 imitation. And that is pleasing. So what I'm going to do is put the lavalier mic right next to it and do a stereo recording, which is comparable to something that I'm doing. Like, this is not the first I've heard of Roswell. In fact, I also gave a try at their Mini K47. Oh, I figured out what was the cause of that, Stephen. The reason the Lavry was acting harsh is because I had its sound set to transformer or X-former. And that is what was bringing up something in the noise floor that was kind of poppy and crackly. I switched it away from that special sound. I did a post on my SoundCloud demonstrating the various different settings because I couldn't find anything to show me what that stuff was about. So first of all, I took the Lavry apart and I reseated all the ground connections and stuff, and that didn't make it go away, the crackliness. But then when I tried different settings on it, I found that the normal or clear setting that I'd been using for years and years, well, actually, not, I haven't had that one for years and years, but the entire time that I had it, I'd been using it. That one was fine. It was the other settings that were doing something funny, and I'm not really sure why that would be, but for whatever, I just decided not to do it. So I made the Lavry thing stop misbehaving that way. Actually, come to think of it, just let me take a moment to... Okay. In theory, I should be broadcasting just fine. Oh, I see what happened. Oh, maybe I do. Oh, no, I just have delay, that's all. I was looking at the little window on the YouTube thingy, And I was like, why is this not showing all of the chat? Granted, you're rather small letters, but I could fix that too, but whatever. So my path towards modeling a microphone of this kind is definitely not looking up the schematic. I don't actually care what the schematic has. I do know that it's FET-based. It's using field effect transistors. So those have a sort of tube-like saturation quality, and you can get that for much cheaper than building entire tube circuits. And I also believe that the Roswell Colaris uses a transformer rather than doing an imaginary transformer, because the guy that builds the Roswell stuff has done like tech shows where he gave little panels on the differences between different kinds of transformers and why you would choose one over another, which is very interesting stuff. And that indicates that they use the transformer sometimes. In fact, I think that is also the case for the Mini K47. I think there's a different one that's the transformerless one, and I did not like that. I got two quick questions right at the bottom here, which is, will I ever build a virtual synth? I don't know. And is side chaining possible with the compressors? Not in the middle of my compressors, no. I don't have sidechain inputs in those. Unless you did some elaborate way of working them, I don't think that's something that works. So what I would be doing, oh, and there's a question that didn't actually shout my name out. Why does console 6 channel sound so different? Well, if you're supposed to be comparing it to a phase-flipped unprocessed copy of the sound, it should go through console 6 bus as well. With console, it's the channel plugin followed by the bus plugin, which gives you the effect, which is interesting because that also brings up something I was thinking about. I might have to bring up my cameras just so that I was doing a Zoom call with somebody on this camera, and they were like, the autofocus is driving me insane. So I came up with a way of shutting it off, and then you just push a little button in the back and it focuses for you. But now I have a fixed focus again, so it's like it can dial me in just fine, but it's not necessarily going to focus in paper properly. So basically the console thing is you have a saturation curve that's like a sine wave shape. And then you have the unsaturate, like the bus thing, which is doing the opposite. And what you get is an end result that is linear again. And the interesting thing about this is if you offset it, so you offset the saturation, what you would get is second harmonic distortion in an interesting way. If you offset the middle of console, what you get is second harmonic in the area where you've sort of leaned it away, and more peakiness in the area where you've added energy, or added headroom rather, because you're altering the headroom on where the saturation is happening. And that has a great deal to do with the idea of modeling the Colaris, because that's one of the things that they do. I do already have a second harmonic generator plugin. That would be single-ended triode, contains that. But it's also possible to do that behavior inside a console system in arguably a better way, because what you'd be doing is asymmetrical manipulations of the saturation curve. Yeah, Darwindies. I don't remember showing exactly what console or channel was doing, and remember, console channel is not the same as channel. If you're talking about using like channel 6 and trying to combine it with a console system, that's simply not going to work. And if what I did sounded different from what you did, then maybe you did something different from what I was doing, because it should behave the same way as I did in videos. Also, console 6 is definitely a little bit odd. That one comes from, one of my plugin users who was throwing algorithms and things at me and was like, here's an algorithm that you apply a saturation and then you can apply the opposite and it goes back to what it was. And that's how console works. So I set that up and went, here's console 6, but I've never really leaned on it all that much. I feel as if it's somewhat, arguably maybe a little bit too intense. Hard to say. And Andy, David, as far as the music jams, those will come back when I'm ready to do them. Burnt out on a lot of stuff lately. And it's very hot, and I have a lot of chaos going on and many things happening. And I will get back to the music thing when I'm ready to get back to it. When I do, probably nobody will listen, but it's partly about me doing it because that's stuff that I want to do, and that's kind of why it doesn't happen when it's not working for me. It's also an interesting question as to why does one do music, or why does one do anything like this in the first place? And these are good questions. Like, you might or might not be able to see, probably not, on the synthesizer right now, I have put a big sign on the bottom, which is going to cause me to flag this particular stream as not child friendly, but I made a big label for the bottom of the synth, and it says telegraph fucking everything, because I figured out that was what I was lacking in terms of the music making stuff, and that's something that I could try to fill in, because when I'm doing my kind of cyborg generative music thing, then the synthesizer is playing a sort of dub techno background thingy, whatever it's doing, but it throws weird stuff at you. Like, the way that the randomness works, it doesn't depart too harshly from where it started, but still, every time it comes up with something, it's a new and unexpected thing. There is no advance warning. There is no telegraphing of it. And that's where one of the differences comes in, because I've got more counters and things. I have those sort of octadivider counters where you can send a trigger in and you get one that's divided by 2, one that's divided by 4, so on down to one that's divided by 256. And you can tell them to be like square waves or just pulses, or even inverse pulse, where it stays on until it ducks out again. And I need to lean on that a lot more compositionally so that I can set up things where a number of different instruments duck out, because that won't be quite as random. There will still be random chord changes happening, although I could also set it up in such a way where it's suppressing the chord changes until key moments, and that might be interesting too. But the idea is I need to be able to telegraph some of this musical stuff if I intend to do an improvisational thing. And that's what I was doing for 2 years and what I stopped over the last month. And it might take another month for me to figure it out. But I was not telegraphing what I was doing. And I would get to things like when the guy commented, "It's so bad, it's good." And that killed my joy of music for a solid month. There was an element of truth in what the guy said, because I was doing something that was so arcane and weird, and he didn't delight in that. Like, not everybody delights in getting weird chord progressions thrown at them. Like, I grew up on Zappa, right? And the stuff that I like doesn't necessarily translate. And if I'd like to be able to translate, much like Frank Zappa said, well, you can do anything you want as long as you pop a human voice on it. That's what people want to hear. If I'm doing instrumental stuff, I need to be able to telegraph what it's doing, or at least make it seem as if there is some guiding principles going on. Or it's just going to be more of the like, well, I'll tune into this. I have no idea what's happening. I still have no idea what's happening. And I'm out. It's like there's a filmmaking thing. It's actually not a filmmaking thing so much as a TV producing thing, where firstly the Sesame Street show and then the Blue's Clues show worked out that children pay attention to the television when they can understand what's happening. And when you lose them, not in the sense of boring or not so much as happening, but in the sense of confusing and impossible to follow, people tune out. And I think that is not just children. I think that is adults, because you can do music, famously, John Coltrane. You can do music that is so challenging that like a really intense musician might be able to follow it, but your random listener is not going to be able to follow what's happening, and they will tune out. So there's a thought, So yeah, well, if I look stressed out, that's probably because I am, but whatever. Somebody was asking about the washing machine. Bo was asking about the washing machine. Still broken. It is, the part that's broken is worse than the centrifuge cycle. The part that's broken is the pump died. So, there is still a load of laundry water in there. It's soapy laundry water. I joked around about how I can keep doing laundry in there. Well, to an extent, there's points where I wouldn't want to keep doing it anymore. Like, I washed sheets and the thing died, and I was like, well, but those are sheets. They weren't particularly they weren't unpleasant in any way. So I'll do all my skivvies and socks. Now I've done that. Now I don't feel like doing more laundry in there. But I went and I got hose things, and I got a little pump that's supposed to run off of your electric drill. Never get one of those. It's bad. I was all set to try to learn how to empty the thing out, and then I could probably continue to use it just by kind of manually. I would literally do a hand pump if I had one. I would use a pump to empty the thing out into the normal place where the water is supposed to go, and then basically just refill it, knowing that it wasn't going to do a perfect job, but I would be able to do another wash cycle that way, and just continue fishing stuff out of there and then wringing it out and rinsing it in the bathtub. And I could get by doing that, although it's a lot of pain in the butt compared to how these normal things go. And it's like, I got to remember, I have spent so much time in my life not having a washing machine that I feel like it's kind of fussing about that being broken feels cheap. Feels like I'm not going to go there. I could go to a laundromat like a normal person, but I'd rather get a hand pump and pump the water out by hand and then continue using my thing. But that's where that stands. It's still not fixed. I still haven't been able to pump out the water that's in it. If I do figure out how to do the latter, and I might be able to do better than the attempt at the hand pump, because I basically screwed myself with that. I was like, oh goodness, well, I can get a hose and cut the hose in half and use that. And then here's a $10 pump that you put on your drill. That sounds perfect. I can be patient. I'll use that. Well, the reason it's a $10 pump is because it doesn't freaking work. And was complete waste. Like, absolutely doesn't work at all. Completely failed. And you can spend $100 on a pump that's perhaps more likely to work, and I did not. So, remains to be seen. The graph that I showed, this is not really comb filtering because this isn't a frequency response chart. This would be a waveform. This would be like a triangle wave and then a sort of circle shape which represents a sine wave distortion, and then an invert circle shape which represents the opposite of that, and then putting it back. You apply both of the distortions and get the original result out. And then if you offset one of the distortions by a DC offset, you will get a console system where the negative swing of, and this is probably worth doing, like somebody was asking, are you going to make a console 7 that has all of the bus color things? Absolutely not. I'm not going to be making a bus color style thing. If I do, and I'm very likely to do, console systems that are meant to act like, I was talking about some of the old Beatles consoles, like the old EMI consoles months back. If I'm going to be doing something like that, it's going to be through working with raw algorithms rather than getting a coat of paint, namely a impulse response, and just putting color on top of it. Like, this is what I'm talking about with regard to modeling something like Colaris, except for that doing the getting second harmonic happening this way means it could be on any channel, and I could pick which direction to sort of lean the second harmonicness. Like, one thing would, there's a laundromat in my town. If there is a drainage thing in the washer, which I can't get to because it's full of water and it's really heavy and I can't really move it, and there's a dryer on top of it, and by that I mean built into it, the drainage pipe that the water needs to go to is like a good 4 foot off the ground. It does a little sewage trap and then goes up. So anything that I do needs to be able to pump water up a reasonable amount. So yeah, that ain't gonna work. Also, I wouldn't want to dump it out the door or anything either, because I have enough trouble dealing with my lawn. I have this little bitty tiny backyard, and it's mostly fenced in, and there is Virginia creeper adjacent to it, so that sometimes stresses me out really bad as well, because I basically have a invasive hostile plant that's trying to kill my entire world, namely the house, any trees that are nearby, any fences. It tries to get across the lawn, sending creepers, namely called a Virginia creeper, to get inside the house and rip the siding off of it. It's nuts what this plant does. It's nuts. And since it's on the border of 3 different people's properties, nobody's really interested in dealing with it. And I had trees once, and it killed them. And it destroyed my backyard so badly that I got a citation from the police, because it got so nasty that I couldn't cope with going there. And then very quickly, it was just a complete disaster. And they thought maybe I was running like a crack house or something. One of those people that's like, well, he's not taking care of his lawn or mowing his lawn because he's too busy running a crack house. And that ain't me. But all the same, I had to get a landscaper to come in and basically obliterate everything because I was like, I cannot face this. I hate lawns and plants and things so bad. Anyways, this is a massive digression. It's just, this is all the kinds of stuff that gets me away from plugins, gets me away from music or unable to face music. Let me have a look at some of our commentary here while we go, because it's our 11:30 already, and we got about an hour and a quarter to go. Yeah, everybody should watch it on 144p so I don't look as stressed, right? Darwindies, what is your spiritual background? You seem to possess a degree of inner peace. What, today? Maybe not today, but pretty much whatever spiritual background I have is basically because I had to get clean and sober at some point. So I got into the whole 12-steppy thing, but I sort of turned it to my own purposes. It's not a match for all of that kind of stuff. Like there's places that are basically like Bible thumpers, and I'm a little more ambiguous spiritually about that. But I do what you might call the self-help sort of thing of trying to pursue that stuff. And, so what other people might call a guru, I have a sponsor who is basically just another guy like me, but he's a little further along. And I'm working steps and stuff, which involves me figuring out character defects and issues and things like that, and trying to understand how that stuff works and where it comes from so that I can be more willing to have it not be plaguing me all the time. And I'm not going to get too far into that, but it's interesting. And if anybody is running into problems with like drinking or drugging where they're like, I can't do this anymore, this has become ridiculous and stupid, and it hasn't been fun for a long time, and this just sucks. Well, yeah, go to some freaking meetings. Meet some people who you can relate to who are also ceasing to get high. And that's the thing. Yeah, and if you are looking for an agnostic 12-step fellowship, you should go to Narcotics Anonymous, because that is more likely to be less religious, because like drug addicts are just freaks. And as one, I can say that. So, which is not to say that, well, I mean, if you talk about a spirituality, it's basically not about you just making it all up. There's an interesting angle on that. Like, you ever heard of Elizabeth Gilbert? The lady that wrote Eat, Pray, Love, which is apparently kind of cheesy, but I'm not so concerned about that. She basically wrote this blockbuster book, which is kind of blockbuster because it's sort of like playing to the bleachers there. It's like the stuff it has to say is like, oh yeah, enjoy yourself, and easy to accept, right? But she ended up in this situation where it's like, now what am I going to do for a follow-up? And that's it. If you have had a blockbuster hit of some kind, that is terrifying. And she got into a whole bunch of different researches. She's got this TED Talk, which I have seen a number of times. And it's Your Elusive Creative Spirit. And when she talks about that in this TED Talk, she's talking about literally what she does as far as sort of a spirituality type thing, but in a different way. It's not in the same way as you might expect, but it's interesting. She's getting back to the ancient Greeks, and I like this because I feel it really relates in so many ways to a lot of things that we might want to do as creative type people. And the ancient Greeks did not say you are a genius. They said you have a genius, in the same way that you might have a friend, or have a significant other, have a pet maybe. It's a separate thing. A genius is not you. The genius is something else going on. I could call it a higher power and not have any trouble with that. I could call it a god, but I wouldn't call it the only one. Just all the different kinds of stuff going around. And what it can do is, if you're open to it, you're just traipsing along doing whatever it is. You've showed up for your part of the job, and a brilliant song just drops into your head. Now, was that because you were so amazing, or was it just because you had a willingness and you were damn lucky? And that's what Elizabeth Gilbert is going on about with regard to the elusive creative genius. It's like, no, you are not a genius. Back in the day, they didn't say you are a genius. They weren't that kind of foolish. They were like, you have a genius. It came and visited you. It gave you a little present. And that's been my experience back to the point of when I first did console. I was really trying to come up with something that would work better than what I was getting out of channel. And the idea just dropped into my head. I didn't think it out. It was just there. And those are the ones I appreciate most. Those are the ones that are more valuable, because it's not all about just what I can make happen with my own ego and self. I'm more interested in like the sort of Zen-like thing, sort of Buddhist thing of ditch the self and get with the flow of everything. So the spirituality question is a really interesting question. It really is. And all I can do is give my own take on that, and it'll probably go some ways towards explaining many of my choices and many of the things that I care about. It's one of the reasons that I want to do some of my logic gate stuff. As you can see, I have notes in some of the things I'm going to be doing. I thought maybe I could talk about some of this a little bit and get advice on which things to do first, or ways of putting it together. But I'm basically just trying to open things up for that creative spirit to come and visit, because it's not me, but I can make a little home for it. I can make things welcome for it. So let me see. A little talk in the chat about the washing machine. Yeah, I figures. Joshua Schulman, I did not register what you said at first, but thank you for enjoying it. And yeah, one of the things that I do with the Patreon is nothing that I do ever requires you to pay money to the Patreon in order to get it. It's only if you can afford it and you want to fund other cool things or watch me continuing. Basically, the budget I get to operate on is to some extent linked to how well the Patreon does, by which I mean I'm not going to like wreck myself and end up having nowhere to live on the back of trying to do stuff that's super generous, but I'm also not going to end up with like fancy sports cars and stock market investments and crap like that. I have no interest in doing any of those things. I just want to keep doing what I do until I fall over dead. And I just assume that not happen anytime soon, so we'll work on that part as well. I do exercise and so on to try to keep fit. Try not to gain too much weight, stuff like that. Nick, am I planning to put a DRes control on Ditherbox so I can turn all dithers into bit crushers? No, but I'm doing them all one at a time. So, like TPDF dither is going to get the same controls. Spatialized dither is going to get the same controls. Tape dither is going to get the same controls. Paul dither is going to get the same controls. Everything that I've got that could be considered to be an appropriate choice for that kind of stuff is getting the 16 to 24-bit control. It defaults to 24-bit. And the DRes control, which defaults to 0, namely off. And it does not come with Ditherbox because that's too large of a chunk. I'd rather make Lego blocks of stuff. I'd rather not try to make, this is the big plugin that contains all of the things. Like, I hate that kind of stuff, so I'm going to be honoring what I think is worth doing. And yeah, that's barring new ideas, which I'm welcome to. There's some ideas I'm even looking to explore, like I'm going to revisit pressure, I think, because pressure has included a distortion stage, and I feel like I can tie the scaling of that distortion stage to the degree of compressedness going on, and that would enable me to either saturate more as the compression goes in or saturate less as the compression goes in. And I'm real interested to see how that works out. Yeah, so Peter Lutzdig is asking me a question. It's, which ear plugins work best for modern hip-hop vocals? Bear in mind that has a lot more to do with your artist and your microphone and such. There's no such thing as like, well, this plugin is for making things modern hip-hop vocals. It's like, well, but what are you trying to do? Like, by example. So I'm very thrilled that I just got this microphone. It's the Fancy Pants Roswell. It's like a month's income for me, and I consider it well worth it because I'm using it for Q&As and such, and I'm using it for my plugin videos, and I am going to measure it and figure out a way to make a plugin that maybe won't replicate it, because you can't replicate something like this. You can't take like a lavalier mic, run a plugin, and get something like this. The polar pattern is going to be different. Proximity effect is going to be different. And the self noise on this is wonderfully quiet. It is super quiet. Like there's no hiss in the background of it. But there are things that I could do as far as, again, putting that there and then taking the lavalier mic and putting that up and matching their levels fairly well. The lav is probably going to end up being a little bit louder. And then doing a wide range of sounds, whether that be vocal sounds or running synthesizer parts into a speaker of some kind. Ideally, I'd like to make like a square wave sound in air so that I could really measure what was going on. But that's challenging. So that I can measure a stereo recording, one half of it being the lavalier mic, and the other half being time-aligned, what the expensive mic is doing. If I look at the waveforms of that, I'll be able to see this is how fast the high frequencies react with the straight-up just lavalier mic, the tiny measurement microphone. This is how fast the waveform gets through like the transformer and so on. I can measure how much high frequency, like, you know how I've got acceleration, the plug-in acceleration, plug-in Crunchy Grooveware, stuff like that. You know how I've got like channel, all these different variations on channel, but they have all, with the exception of the very first ones where there was a bug, do basically a high pass and a slew clipping that it cannot slew faster than a certain amount. And when I can measure stuff like that, that's one of the reasons the channel works, is that I was measuring the behavior of some impulse responses from real gear, like, you know, API, SSL, Neve, stuff like that, preamplifiers basically. And having measured those, I could apply not an impulse response, but the limitations of how fast the signal could change from one place to the other, or the limitations of how much bass is left if you just throw DC at it, and how fast does that roll off. And I'll also be able to do things like measuring. The Roswell is designed to clip asymmetrically. That's basically all the second harmonic does, is it's essentially modeling a tube circuit that apparently is single-ended or something. So the way that tube circuit works, you're getting even order harmonics. And what that means is it's clipping asymmetrically. That's all even order harmonics really means. It's that it's not perfectly symmetrical. That's real easy to make plugins out of. I've already got those. I've got Purest Warm. Purest Warm clips asymmetrically. You can apply Purest Warm to a microphone and maybe have it act a little bit like an Roswell, but not in a measured way. If I can measure exactly how much it's doing that, then I can apply it as simple algorithms and probably come up with something that's musically useful. And what I'll be doing mostly is taking my little recording that I have not made yet, but that's what I'm going to be having to do. And the capture that I did with the Roswell and the Electret mic, which would literally be taped right next to it, as close as I can get to it, and making a plugin where I can take that recording of the Electret mic, run the plugin, and have it not sound exactly like the Roswell, but fake it fairly well. Because with that recording, that's exactly what I'll have. And that's the hope anyway. And I'll make a big point of saying, like, this is not an exact modeling of the thing, but these are some things that I analyzed. If you like this type of sound, you can take your cheaper microphone, because one of the things about cheaper microphones is that cheaper microphones are noisier, but they also don't saturate as nicely or at all. And little measurement microphones, little Electret microphones, they might saturate, but back off a little bit, and they're going to act like measurement microphones. They're noisier, but they're tiny, and probably have a higher dynamic range than large diaphragm microphones. Actually, I'm not sure that's true, but you do get the tiny little ones as measurement mics that can handle insanely loud sound pressure levels. And if it's doing that accurately, you're getting kind of like a digital mix bus of microphone. You're getting like, this is mathematically perfect and detracts, reduces nothing in any way. But in order to get a musical result that sits in a mix properly, there's many things that have to be removed, and you have to know which. Let me have a look at some of these chat things as I'm talking about this endlessly. And we've only got like a little less than an hour left. And then I'm going to go rest. But Andy says, the only thing you need to believe is you're a little pony. Damn straight. Alistair is layering Purist Drive instead of layering them. Is it more CPU efficient to use one of your console plugins? I'm not sure. Honestly, I think layering is generally a good idea. If it did exactly the same thing, it might be a little bit more CPU efficient, but honestly, I think it's going to be about the same, really. It's not going to be too wildly different, or it shouldn't be. And in that recording that I did, and by the way, I have plans probably during the next week, if all goes well, for something else that I'll be releasing. In the recording that I did with all that heavy metal guitars and stuff, I'm layering a coloration plugin, the one that went into the starter kit, quite heavily. I've got multiple copies all over the place. Because having little distortions or saturations or colorations at different places in your mix is completely different from having it like just one big coloration at the end. You might very well do better to have stuff layered and scattered through various places. That's how the real deal works. Real recording desks and real mixers have small roll-offs and saturations and colorations all through the circuit. It's not just in one place. It's a fairly key point. But yeah, getting back to the rap vocals or whatever, modern hip hop vocals, you got to be more specific. Like, talk more specific, and I'll give you more specific answers. Because there are specific, like, if you're like, it needs to have all kinds of energy boost and be incredibly aggressive sounding, I'll be like, oh, energy. There's literally a plugin called Energy that gives you various kinds of extremely aggressive, kind of excitory, high frequency or mid frequency boosts that are very, and I don't know whether that would be something that you'd use. I think a lot of hip hop, your backing stuff might be very bit crushed and might be very artificial, and the raw capture probably wants to be really upfront. If your stuff is sitting back, something that you might try is the plugin's density or drive, because they're simple distortions, but you can also roll off all of the bass on the distorted part and then use the dry wet so that you have this aggressive edge on the highs and upper mid-range, because you're distorting that, but you're high passing it, so low frequencies don't just fart out. And using the dry wet, you get some of the regular sound and some of this hyped up, aggressive, almost amp-like sound. And that might be very key. That might be useful if you're trying to get extreme impact and intelligibility out of your vocal. And again, it's not necessarily that you'd be distorting it to crap. Just add a little saturation. And that will give you more of a punchy, upfront, edgy vocal. Now, I don't know if that's necessarily what you're after. It's just the first thing that came to mind as far as getting more specific about what you need. Oh, goodness. So let's see now. Do I like kombucha? I haven't actually tried it. I like chai tea, and I'm a huge coffee fan, so I drink arguably too much coffee. Do each of the flavors and bus colors 4 use the same basic saturation algorithm, which is density? Basically, yeah. Yeah, they're using the same basic saturation algorithm, and it's different degrees of intensity of the density algorithm, which is essentially just a sine wave. It's a sine curve. It's running the signal through the function sine parentheses x and taking the output. So if you do that, it will saturate more and more to the point where it'll wrap around. And then if you cap it at like 1.57, so if your signal is louder than 1.57, you just leave it at that, and then it's always going to be the maximum volume. Otherwise, you keep getting louder and it'll start getting quieter and then even invert. And I have a plugin, I think, did I call that one Fracture? And also some variations of Spiral do that. They wrap around a little bit. In fact, I think that back when I did Spiral variations, now I'm trying to remember what I called those. Anyway, the follow-up distortions from Spiral also did weird stuff. So let's see. Let's continue looking at chat. We got about 45 minutes more before I go and sleep. So, and focal, yeah, bus colors are impulse responses, but they also include saturation. Stephen K is asking, I'm considering the purchase of a JDA Slabs LDAC. I don't actually know anything about that, so that's fair. You might very well. As far as CMOS pertinent, here's what I was going to be talking about. and can still do so. I need to take pieces of paper much like this one and a pen and draw up my own references for things like this. This is the PT2399 chip. You can look at this here, and when you have one of these chips, you're always looking at the top first. You can hook stuff up to it much like this and have it actually work. The PT2399 is a echo maker, and it's present in a lot of cool stuff. You also get things like this, where this is a TLO802 0A2 op amp, and you get these schematics that look like this, but the actual chip will have a little drawing kind of like this, and it's the pinout. It's what's inside it, where you connect to the chip to do various things. And that's basically what I need to do. Like, here's another one with op amps. And I need to draw a sort of comic for drawing this stuff and teaching people like what the little triangle means, what various other forms and things mean, and showing you where to solder stuff to these various pins of the chip, so that if you got a hold of some of those, you could start putting things together. And that is something that interests me. So when we talk about CMOS, we're talking about this. We're talking about like 4011, 4013, which is a flip-flop. You can do an octadivider. 4015, that's a shift register. The shift register, you can do a Turing machine if you can get randomness into it. Or if you can't get randomness into it, you can do a shift register where it's a cycling thing. A single shift register like that has 8 stages. So you can do something where you keep feeding in a trigger input and it's going to cycle a result. There's also a chip called a DAC 800 where you could take the outputs of this and get a continuous voltage, like a control voltage out of it. CO417 or 22, that is a counter. It's a decade counter, so you feed a pulse into this, and different pins start lighting up, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then back to 1 again. And that means you can do sequencers based on it, because you can run the outputs through resistor or potentiometers and stuff, and then have basically the knobs on your little sequencer. So this is a high note, this is a low note. You get to set that up. Ripple carry binary counter dividers. That's one of the things that I got into with the recent synth work, is being able to do stuff where you're sending a clock in, but then some of your outputs go really, really slow. So it's a timer. CO449 hex inverter. This is your tube sound fuzz. This is also what a particular somewhat notorious the WASP filter uses, is just one of the 449s. And you got your output there. You got a 4066. It's a quad bilateral switch. I got stuff like that recently as well. And the idea with the quad bilateral switch is, here's a connection, and if you put voltage into this other pin, it connects. The switch goes on. If you don't have voltage to it, the switch goes off. And it's a way of manipulating other stuff that's happening. Then you've got quad exclusive OR and exclusive NOR. This is the mini shimmery. This is synthesizer cymbal sounds. You run a bunch of little square waves into these and you start getting something that sounds like a hi-hat. You start getting a crazy thing out of it. I have used multiple mini shimmeries. Mini shimmeries from Blue Lantern are based on this idea. They're based on the 4070. They use square waves going into it, but you set up the right frequencies and the square waves go into that and you get a very cymbal-like sound. 4073, 4081, I think it's the 4081 that I've got. AND gates. Basically, it's like you can, this output is high if both of the inputs are high, but if only one of them is, then, so that's essentially more control voltage stuff. CD 14538B. This one's interesting because this is it's called a dual precision monostable multivibrator. What it is a pulse lengthener. You could use it as a primitive envelope generator. Basically what it does, and more than that, it takes in a pulse and then the output hits, but you have multiple, since it says it's a dual precision monostable multivibrator, you can delay the output tick on this as well as lengthen it. So you can have ticks coming in and sustain it until it's the length of a note and going like that. And you can also add another part. I got to learn how this works. I have them. I bought 100 of them because they're 39 cents. But I'm not entirely sure how you work with that. But I believe that that is also one where you can use another control and delay the onset, meaning that is your swing function. Or it is your delay the percussion a little bit so that it sits in the groove function. There's lots of uses there. 40106 Schmidt trigger inverters. That is basically a square wave that's guaranteed to start up and go. There's other possibilities there, but this is like the 4049, but based on distinctly being an inverter. It'll do a good square wave output. Here's your DAC 800. That is a digital to analog converter. It's a very simple little device. And you can send the bits from any of these other things into here, and it'll give you a 8-bit audio output or a 8-bit control voltage. I'm going through all these because this is all of the stuff that I gotta get into a form that works. Here's an interesting one. LM4250 Programmable Operational Amplifier. This is an op-amp, but it's an op-amp where there's a special setting you can do. Quiescent current set, I believe, is how that works. And you can make it have analog limited slew rate. And you can also set it to run on like micro power. It can be very efficient as far as power consumption is concerned. But what you do basically is use this as a dirty, nasty op-amp. And it gives you the sound of sort of those special op-amps in old Japanese stomp box circuits, where it'll color the sound of a guitar or whatever, because it's slowing the slew rate, because you can run it on the micro power so that it can't pump out lots of slew rate. And there are EQs, like I am a fan of the Blue Lantern Sour filter, also known as the LM4250 filter, which is this. Blue Lantern has been able to make synthesizer filters that are the filthiest filters you've ever heard in your life using this technique. Yeah. OPA-X132 high-speed operational amplifiers. These are the ones that sound super clean. Nothing more to be said about those. TLO82, that is very accessible. There's lots of them around. And I believe I have, well, maybe not. You can get things where you can look up the basic op-amps. You can get a single op-amp or a dual or a quad op-amp for a larger one. And then lastly, the P2399 Echo chip because these are cool. This is very doable. This is very homebrewable. So yeah, I did say CMOS. This is part of what I'm working on. It's important to me. It's one of the things that I want to see happen. So now that I've said that, time to look at the chat and what I've missed. By the way, in my list of stuff, that's one of the things in this list. The circles surround like categories of stuff, entire categories to do. So right up at the top there, Nick is going, would it make sense to create two plugs that default to slightly different settings to model analog imperfections in stereo? I don't believe that's what makes analog good. I don't. I super don't. I think you would be just as well have all your analog stuff matched fine. Like you could have your analog parts match utterly perfectly and it wouldn't hurt you in the least. Nobody would complain. You're not going to get a Neve desk or something and be like, this sucks, all of the resistors match perfectly. Honestly, they do as good as they can. When you get decent quality gear, on a professional level, some of what they're doing is getting that stuff to be more of a good match. So I don't feel that there is an advantage to be had from having the EQs be slightly different, the gains be slightly different, any of that kind of stuff. You don't necessarily want it. Like in real deal land, you'll spend extra money to get things like matched microphones because there's nothing much to be gained from not having them match. Although if you can save money by getting stuff that isn't intentionally matched. Yeah, I was thinking about Mojo. Mojo is one of the ones that wraps around as well. It's one of those strange experimental algorithms. Cosmic Feed asks, like, bus colors can be put anywhere. Doesn't really matter as far as console 5 is concerned. I don't honestly recommend using bus colors as a console channel substitution. Back in the day I did that. I don't feel it's that beneficial, honestly, anymore. And all of bus colors does dynamic impulse responses. That's what it literally is. That and the character plugins, those are all about dynamic impulse responses. That's the whole idea. Now, Cosmic Beam is indeed a weird beast. I don't think it necessarily does sound good, but it's interesting. And as far as the whole triangles and waves thing, I don't honestly know. I mean, that if basically I'm going to need to pray for more inspiration on that one. Not that I don't pray to my muse. It doesn't seem to want me to do that or need anything of the sort. Maybe I should try. But basically I'm going to have to get lucky and have a brilliant idea where it's like, this all of a sudden is the density algorithm, but for making consistent wave angles. And you can do it as much as you want. And if I came up with something like that, I would totally try it, and I'm not sure what it would sound like. But it might be possible to do something like that. I'm just not sure what it would entail. If I knew, I would have done it already. Yeah, I'm glad you're liking the bit crushers, though, Cosmic, because there's more of those coming. They're normal ones coming. Like, I think I'm going to follow it up with the TPDF just because might as well. And it's my special TPDF where it's just slightly offset, so there's about a half a least significant bit of offset if you averaged it out. And that causes the bottom range of the noise floor to occupy 3 bit spaces instead of only 2, and that's what makes it sound better. So it's an unusual choice, but it's a thing. Maybe it would be better if it literally occupied 2 bottom bits plus the inverse of the golden ratio for the remaining bit. I don't know. So, Robert Kennedy, nope, nothing that I do does dynamic resonance suppression. You should look into other people's stuff, like the Melda or the Oak Sound. And it is indeed a shame when audio has annoying ringing frequencies, but you can't actually fix those with EQ. All you can do is mask them, and there are other costs involved with that. Well, Nick, the thing about the magnetodynamic infundibulum is that it wasn't really doing that. It didn't have any filters at all. Instead, it was doing something really weird with transformers. And I'm not currently using it because I'm not currently running a cheap Roland line mixer into another thing for audio capture. But, yeah, it wasn't really so much about filters, that one. Although it could be, like, anytime you're doing capacitors and inductors, part of what you're doing is introducing filters. I think inductors are fun. There's a lot that can be said for them. Oh, God, excuse me. I'm so tired. I'm going to be able to go to sleep in about a half an hour. It's fine. So Stephen's talking about an invert arpeggiator of tempo, like the analogy I made of the swing factor. I'm not really sure what that refers to, but it's an interesting topic. The musician that I like, Colin Benders, who is currently streaming about once a week anymore, has spent a lot of time working on clocking and doing wonky clocks, like timing a music system in such a way where the tick that's driving it is not happening at a regular interval. And you can throw low frequency oscillators on the tempo control. You can do any number of weird things and sometimes get pretty interesting results. So Darwin Dees is asking, what studio monitors do I have? Basically, I'm just running on NS10s. They're slightly more complicated than that, though. They're somewhat modified NS10s in that I've got them damped a little bit differently, if I remember correctly. And I think they're using fancier capacitors and inductors, but the same values that they originally were. I'm using decent patch cable going to them, although I forget exactly what I've got there. And they're being powered by Channel Island D100s, which are sort of audiophile monoblocks. They're Class D monoblocks. And, of course, being driven by a Lavery converter. Or, indeed, being driven by literally the Heritage Audio mixer. Because the Lavery converter is going into the mixer, not vice versa. It's one of the things that I've been enjoying recently is I do own a Pono. And I patched it directly into some of the aux ins on the mixer. So although it's not set up for me to play stuff super loud, I can get really high quality audio into this system. And that can be very gratifying sometimes. If I'm putting on, say, a Godspeed You Black Emperor album, even if it's just off of a CD, you rip it off of a CD, you put it on the Pono, and it'll sound pretty magical anyway, because you're getting the most out of what you had. But yeah, I clicked with the NS10s, and then I've been going with that. Oh God, you know something? That just tells me something else that I need to add to this page. Now that I've gotten ahead of the dithers enough, the plan has been, see, I wrote download. The plan has been to bring everything everything that came out as a audio unit. And I think they're all 64-bit, but everything that originally said demo will be the real deal. Now, as far as if you're looking for the port to VST and Windows and Linux and all of that kind of stuff, that's a separate question. I can write that down as well. There's no reason I shouldn't. Honestly, I've been thinking about other ways of accomplishing near space. But it might be nice to revisit just so that I can dig a little deeper. There should be ways of being able to do a near space type thing that's literally complementary. One of the things I've been thinking about, and I was watching the Bricasti guy, Casey from Bricasti, in a really low quality video interview from I don't know when. And he was tossing around some ideas that I thought were very interesting. And although he didn't specifically suggest it, it occurred to me that you got your near reflections, right? So you've got close-up things, and you near echoes and stuff will produce a bunch of comb filtering and things like that. You got far-field echoes where you can run through all-pass filters, have that sort of bloom effect. I have MV that does that. MV gives you purely bloom effect, purely stacked all passes. And that does a pretty good job of like deep field stuff. And to my experience, we've always gone for doing the near field echoes, and then because it's a logical thing, fed that to the far field stuff. And my question becomes why? Why are we doing that? There is no need to run those things in series and then have your far field ambience colored by the near field comb response stuff. I don't get it. I don't think that's reasonable. I think what should be happening is we run near field echoes and things for the immediate ambient stuff, and then the far field stuff is being fed the direct signal in parallel. And that's what I'm going to be trying to work on. So that's another thing. I've got a stack of plugins to do as well. But when I revisit reverbs in a way where I can really make a expansive space, that's what I'm going to be doing, is running, near echoes and far field ambience in parallel and designing them to work together. And it might indeed end up with stuff running largely on bloom effects for the deep ambience. But it's something that I'm going to need to work out. I have watched Ben and Gear. It's a guy who used to go by Flashbulb or something. He's an electronic musician. He's a very clever fellow. And he recently did a review of a reverb pedal that seemed very promising. But it also got me interested in digging into the reverb thing again. So we'll see. I don't think I've really mastered reverb yet. I have some reverbs and various different kinds of experiments and things, but I don't really think I've mastered reverb all that much yet. I'd like to learn from some of the stuff that I learned off of the MIDI verbs and, the word length shift gain stuff that I do. So Cosmic asks, is it worth dithering each channel? What are you doing with them? You don't just dither stuff to dither it. You dither it when it's going to an output. If it's going to an output and it's going to be truncated into a fixed point format, that's when you dither. It's really very straightforward. So if all of your channels are going to an external mixer, then yes, you would dither to all of those if they're going to a 24 or indeed a 16-bit output. Alistair says, your personal music would be great for sync libraries. Have you ever considered? I doubt that. I don't think so. I don't think I have it good enough. Although the guy that does all of the YouTuber music, especially gamers, I remember the name off the top of my head, but that guy has a neat thing going on. At one point, I had linked to his website just so that I could be kind of reminded of like, oh, look, this is what he's doing. But the trouble is, that guy, and I can't think of who he is, but everybody knows this guy, does just these incredibly large numbers of little, 3-minute, 45-second, whatever, just little bits of music and stuff. All these little composed chiptune or rocky or whatever the hell it is. The Kevin somebody? I mustn't confuse him with Kevin Rex, though. And nothing that I do musically really works that way. It's like, if I'm going to do a 3-minute thing, it better be a freaking hit song. Otherwise, I want to do 2-hour-long improvisational journeys. Kevin Macleod. I had Kevin. That's exactly the guy I was thinking of. Incomptect. Yeah, he does a really cool thing that is very much like sync libraries. But I just can't connect with what he does. That genre of stuff, in the sense of like little snippets of self-contained bits of music that could be repurposed and used for things. It's neat, but it's not what's speaking to me. That's not what comes out of me when I make music, so I'm not really concerned about doing it. Okay, so we still got about 15, maybe 20 minutes of question space and stuff. So I've showed you all of these because it did say this was going to be about CMOS. And that's why, is I got this on my plate. I have to decide things like, how do I start explaining this? Because it's not simply about like, look, here are chips. You can use any of these. It's more like you're going to want to do specific things. So I'm thinking maybe the very first one is likely to be tube sound fuzz. I should show people how to make tube sound fuzz. You plug a guitar into it and it's all distorted. Back in the day, I did variations on that as well. Like, you can do your sort of basic tube sound fuzz. You can do different styles of input where it's a sort of soft, mushy fuzz, so you can brighten it up a little bit. I had a chain of resistors and capacitors where I was loading down low frequencies a little more than the high frequencies just to get a bit of extra articulation out of things. And then I also made plugins that I called one The Fiend. And a roommate of mine, half a lifetime ago, was really into this. What you do is you take all of the inverters and wire them together. Just 6 stages of distortion with little tiny chip capacitors to connect them together. And you basically wire it directly off of the pins of the thing. And when you're finished, the pedal feeds back all by itself without anything plugged into it. And it has more distortion than anything in the world. And it's its own thing. Also, one of the problems with that is you do that and then the chip will burn up. Mine weren't burning up because I was running them off of 9 volts. And you could also power starve it to get better results. But if you start running that off of 18 volts with all of the inverters engaged and biased into operation, in that way it'll just burn up. The chip will die. So Cosmic has another question, namely, why is the mids knob in your EQ plugin so sweet? Well, it depends which EQ plugin. Can we have a mids out plugin like the EQ but without saturation? Well, that might be why. I'll go and have a look. Let me see whether I can answer this question by going and doing the research. That might be worth doing. So I'm going to the Airwindows, and AU is generally easier. And you mean literally EQ, presumably, so let's go and have a look. There's our C version. We have 8 parameters. If I go all the way to the bottom, you're thinking, oh, okay. So you literally are meaning C strip. I better look at that then. Because they're not necessarily the same. I often try to vary things. EQ should be what's in C strip, but I can't guarantee that. So, and C strip has 12 parameters and all kinds of stuff going on, but on basically it does look pretty similar. So here's some of what's going on. You realize that in the 3-band EQ section, which is basically just, it's not a biquad, but it is a simple IIR filter, not many poles either. So it's a very gentle filter. And the way it's made is you get the bass by rolling off stuff with this filter, and then you subtract that, and that means you have the mid highs, and then you take that and filter the mid, and then you have only the highs. You're basically progressively slicing off frequencies and sorting them into different categories in such a way that if you added them all up together, you'd get the original source back perfectly. So that's part of it, but probably what's more interesting to you is the mids in that EQ plugin only work because of saturation. There's no actual gain control in there. What's happening is every single stage in that mids control is running into a little version of density. Every single one in a minor way. So you can't really do a fixed dB boost or gain because it's going to be nonlinear. When you boost, you're adding extra density to that band only. When you cut, like when you cut with the mids, you're going to inverse density, just like in the inverse density plugin. It's using the same algorithm. So your loud sounds are going to still get through. It's also like the Pywacket compressor, where if it clamps down really hard, it's still letting the peaks, the energy through. That is what EQ does, and I'm pretty sure it's the same thing with EQ and C-strip, where there's no actual gain by, gain as gain. Instead, it's simply each band is using a little implementation of density where you can saturate it or you can anti-saturate it and experiment with the density plugin to hear how that sounds like over the full wavelength. And yeah, the reason nobody else has that is because nobody else thought to do anything as crazy as that. But the reason I chose to do that is because when you use the density plugin and boost to make stuff more dense, it also makes stuff sound more upfront because it's saturating. And you can get the opposite effect. If you pull it back, stuff seems to drop back. And if you do that sort of saturation / anti-saturation behavior on bands of frequencies, you can make the bands of frequency seem to come forwards or fall back. And if you dock the mids using that, I think you said something about how you said you can literally suck out mids with that, but you might not understand that what you're doing is sucking out low-level detail while leaving some of the dynamic guts out of it. And the same thing will work for highs, and the same thing will work for lows, is using the C-strip / EQ on that stuff. It's possible to put audio through that is so loud that it's not actually sucking the stuff out anymore. But yeah. And the reason that's different is because nobody does that. Nobody does EQ that uses distortion, much less anti-distortion, to accomplish things. Partly because if you use anti-distortion just on the full audio, it sounds wretched. It sounds terrible. But all these things can find uses. So yeah. Darwindies, do you think there's any connection between Neve preamp sound quality and the high voltages they use? Well, yeah, sure. It's part choice, it's way of doing things, and the high voltage that they use have plenty to do with it. You can take that in opposite directions, by the way. One of the things I use for my guitar sound, and I never got around to, I should tell you guys about one of these things that I'm doing, because I started hinting at a new thing that I'm going to be doing during the next week, most likely, but then I never said a damn thing about it. I need to make a set of bass samples, and that's because I got a set of nylon wrapped flat wounds for my Rickenbacker, because I know a guy whose opinions have been increasingly influencing me. That's a guy named William Whitman, and he is dead set on Rickenbackers need to have flat wounds. It shouldn't be round wounds and all clangy and stuff. No, it's much better this other way. And I think the articulation on notes is going to show me why that is a thing. I had flat wounds on an old Hofner once. But right now, that Rickenbacker has, that you can see in frame, has roto sounds on it that I've never played on a track. The track that I did was the previous strings. So I need to sample that before I replace them. I'm not just taking them off and throwing them away. I bought those roto sounds. So I'm not going to just waste them. So I've basically been not playing it, because it's got some of that like new string chiminess. Not perfectly, but it's got a certain amount of the new string chiminess. I should be able to go through, play a set of notes, probably with my fingernail, like blong, for a big, heavy, powerful, picked-like sound, and do a set of samples at probably different volume levels until the roto sounds have died. I'll wear them out, sampling them. And then with the flat wounds, it won't matter, because the flat wounds are supposed to die. They're supposed to be non-resonant. It's not going to perfectly work that way, but they'll also last longer that way too. But I need to wear out the strings on that Rick sampling it, because I have a new setup, much like the setup that I was using on the guitars in my new demo audio, but I've improved it. Because I was running a guitar amplifier, and on the bass on that demo, I was doing this using round wounds, where the bass was DI for the neck pickup, and then into a guitar amp for the bridge pickup. And that really got me to where I wanted much more than anything previously. But I was running into the guitar amplifier in my little ISO cab with an SM57 stuck in front of it, and it gets this very generic, like, if I was using a high-gain metal amp, I'd probably be able to get a downright nifty sound out of it. That's not necessarily the best as far as some of my classic rock style sounds. I can do better than even the Airwindows SM57. So, Roswell to the rescue again. Roswell Mini K47, same thing I'm trying to use on drums, because on that recording the drums are also SM57s. Everything is. So, not as just kind of really limited sound-wise in certain ways. Just that particular mid-range bark that's only useful for that, and you kind of would want to mix it with stuff, and I basically haven't. And it occurred to me that a lot of the music that I like and a lot of the guitar sounds that I've liked best did not use a close mic SM57 like in heavy metal and stuff. Did not use that. Instead, they were using, Abbey Road's Neumanns and things like that. You got your Beatles, you got your, classic Cream or whatever, is times when they were miking using the good microphones, but several quite far away. You got some of Pink Floyd's Shine On You Crazy Diamond, and the most special guitar sounds in there are also sounds where it's a good microphone and it's some ways off in the room and there's ambience there. You got classic guitar sounds like Judas Priest, where on the British Steel album they had a real house to be in, and so they had more acoustic ambience. And you've got things like my old plugin Hombre, designed to get a sort of ZZ Top-like thing through furnishing a really tight ambience around the sound without a lot of sustain or reverb. And it struck me, what would I get if I was miking the guitar using not the SM57, which is incredibly focused and hears only what's just in front of it, so it's an ultra spotlight on the speaker cone. But I'm not using like a Marshall stack. I don't necessarily benefit from getting that focused in on only the one spot in the cone. If I was using, as I now am, the Mini K47 for that has a whole different polar pattern. That picks up different ambience. What if the inside of the ISO cab was not damped to within an inch of its life with like towels and stuff in there, which it was, but instead was the empty box that it could be, with maybe just a piece of damping material or whatever covering the carpet that's against the ground, so that high frequencies can reflect around inside there more to be picked up by this condenser microphone, but the condenser microphone is not pointed at the back of the cab. It's only going to be picking up. So the question becomes like, okay, how many nasty resonances and unpleasant sounds do I get? And is that improved any if it's just really empty in there? So there's more air to it. And I tried it, and it works. It totally works. It got me a sound that was much closer to like your classic rock or your Beatles, Cream, all that kind of stuff, and closer to your ZZ Top sounds that are secret, that nobody gets to know about because Terry Manning doesn't share as far as his really good work, and Billy Gibbons just tells lots of lies and does not actually like telling people how he accomplished things. So these guys were a little close to the vest, but I gotta wonder whether maybe I stumbled into some of that stuff, because I immediately had those chunky, juicy ZZ Top style guitar tones with all of the ambience and stuff around there. And I'm well pleased with it. It's, when I do get back into doing music again, it'll be taking advantage of that. And that is another thing that I needed to get done and set up and really ironed it out before I sampled the bass, because the bass is going to be sampled using the neck pickup into DI and the bridge pickup into the guitar amp. And I'll be putting out a sample set that uses all of this stuff that I've been getting together. I'm also very likely to have drum samples coming, because I have a new drum miking technique that I'm working on. It involves being kind of close into some gobos that are basically just doors, reflective surfaces. But then I'm also miking from opposite sides of the drum kit at about waist height, maybe a little bit higher, pointed in towards where the snare and stuff is, with the kick drum mic behind the drum stool and out of phase. So I got a lot of experiments in place. That drum miking setup, by the way, is what you heard on the demo of the music that I've been using on stuff. That's how those drums were mic'd. It's just that those drums were mic'd using only SM57s, including on the kick mic. It's like everything has to be SM57s because that's what I had. So I am hot to get these new bass strings going. So I need to do the sampling of the roto sounds, at which point I will have probably the coolest progressive rock sample set that you've ever seen in your life. And it won't have to be progressive rock. In fact, it will be many options regarding, like, I'm very likely to do it as a stereo capture. Because the thing about that is if you're doing a stereo sample, which is really DI on one side and amp on the other, that means you can just run Golem, my Golem plugin. And that means you can adjust the timing between them all you want, just the levels all you want, and mix them down to a single track and use that, rather than being stuck with what I had in mind. So I'm thinking it's going to be made that way. But yeah, so question from some time ago, Stephen K. is like, so you're using density to harness a sort of subtractive EQ approach. Yep. That's the idea. And I feel like that was another one of those Muse things. It's not necessarily down to me. It just fell into my lap because some of the other stuff that I was working on, it's like, bing, here's an idea. So yeah, Andy wants me to make an amp sim. I know. I have some amp sims from the past in the pipe. There are various different kinds of ones. They're all seemingly made differently. Some of them are way too complicated. Some of them are very simple. I didn't think any of them were really good, but I will be re-releasing those. Like I always say in my copious free time. It looks like I'm not doing anything, and then I tell you stuff about like what I've been doing through this amp ISO-cab stuff that I've worked on. And it's like, yeah. And that's not even counting stuff that I work on where nothing actually ends up coming of it. And there has to be stuff like that as well. Not everything gets to come out as a product and be successful. I mean, there's even plugins that I did that didn't end up coming out because they didn't work. So go figure. And by that I mean like literally nothing useful, because if something is broken in an amusing way, I'll totally put it out. But yep. So we will see. And yeah, Bo is working on this beat per minute thing, which is, I feel, a slightly better equation than the one I had. And although I'm not down with the most recent thing, it's like you were working too hard to capture that one little example and the top end while losing all of the body of the... And those are all just winging it anyway. So it's like what I'm really looking for is what the real algorithm is. And I think we more or less found it. So further efforts into that is superfluous. I will just go with what we got. So it's 12:46. I kind of need to go to bed, guys. So I will catch up with you later. I wouldn't expect any music this week, but I don't know. Who knows? Maybe something will happen. When I do restart it, it's probably going to be back to the same time slot, same rough duration, starting at 11 o'clock. And it's probably going to be Tuesdays. I just don't feel it's necessarily going to be this coming Tuesday, because I'm not really in performing mode at the moment. I'm in going to sleep mode at the moment. But yeah. And Andy, you're absolutely right. Bo added his pi theory, and I was like, that's really cool. Let's use that. I think that's actually the thing. That's awesome. So we kind of went with that. And I guess Bo has a plugin. I'm just going to make a list of times and do that. But let us say goodbye to chat for the time being. I'll put you back. And yeah, wish me luck with all of the work that I'm still doing. I may not be able to go live with music at the moment and stuff, but it's all leading towards useful things. And I mean the microphone, my lovely new microphone, that is likely to lead to actual songs. It's just like when I have the cojones to actually write them. And that's why I'm working on the lyric rhyming dictionary based on the top 1,000 words in the English language. And there's all of these things. There's this many things. It's all good. It's something to do, right? Keeps you busy. So I'll talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.